By most appearances, Russell Wasendorf Sr. had everything. He was the CEO of Peregrine Financial Group, a $400 million brokerage firm.
Hello, I'm Russ Wasendorf. I'm Chairman and Chief Executive Officer.
In 2009, he was featured in a company video proudly touting his new $18 million headquarters in Cedar Falls, Iowa.
Even though there's a lot of very high-powered financial firms in the world, there's very few of them that actually have their own building.
3 years later, on the grounds of the same building, he tried to take his own life.
501531, known problem, possible suicide in the woods.
On the morning of July 9th, employees found Wasendorf in his car. A hose running through the window was connected to the exhaust pipe.
The police show up and he is breathing but not responsive.
The clients got a blast email from PFG Best that essentially told them that there had been an attempted suicide by the CEO of the firm.
Word comes out, there's accounting irregularities that the regulators are looking into.
And they basically say this account that we have been consistently told had more than $200 million actually has had consistently well under $10 million.
Customers can't get at their accounts except to close them out. Send everybody into a frenzy.
We're going straight into the story of the past few days, the scandal and collapse of Peregrine Financial, very large.
Inside the car were suicide notes to his wife and son, and what investigators say was an elaborate confession. He wrote that he had been committing fraud for 20 years and had embezzled $100 million in customer money. In the note, he also writes that, "I had no access to additional capital, and I was forced into a difficult decision. Should I go out of business or cheat? I guess my ego was too big to admit failure, so I cheated."
He laid out his alleged fraud and the fact that it had been going on for nearly 20 years, how it started, how he did it, and to some degree why.
In another unusual twist to the story, in the days leading up to his suicide attempt, Wasendorf took a series of puzzling steps.
We know on June 30th, before all this came forward, he was married in Las Vegas.
Around the 26th of June, friends of the Wasendorfs get invitations to a wedding that's scheduled for August 4th in Cedar Falls. It tells, the church it's going to be in, they're going to have a reception at his restaurant and so forth. 4 days later, he flies his private jet out to Las Vegas and marries his fiancée, Nancy. And on July 3rd, he signs over power of attorney to his son. We don't know why he did this. It seems like an odd thing to do, and it's not even clear that he told his son at the time.
Wasendorf's son, Russell Jr., was president of the company. Through his lawyer, Wasendorf Jr. has said he didn't know he was being given power of attorney. His lawyer also said his client had no knowledge of his father's alleged fraud. He is currently cooperating with authorities. He has not been accused of any wrongdoing. After his suicide attempt, Wasendorf was taken to a hospital. He was released 5 days later and was arrested. The charge, lying to regulators.
Well, a big arrest today in the Peregrine Financial scandal.
You have this man who sort of built himself up as a kingpin in this industry, who, by his own confession, was actually lying to pretty much everyone he knew.
According to prosecutors, Wasendorf says he acted alone over all his years of alleged fraud. Russell Wasendorf Sr.'s lawyer has not responded to requests for comment. The town of Cedar Falls was shaken by the news. Local resident Jim Mudd was good friends with Russ Jr. and co-owned a private jet with Wasendorf Sr.
I didn't have any signs that he was a fraud. He's talking about these Middle East dealings and Romania, and I thought maybe the guy was a billionaire. I didn't know.
Wasendorf got his start as a businessman in Cedar Falls, but it was in Chicago, the capital of futures trading, where he first began making a name for himself.
In the late 80s, he was successful in giving some of his clients a good heads up on how to react to Black Monday. He parlayed that success into launching his own brokerage in 1990.
As a futures brokerage, they were the middleman between investors, which included everyone from speculators to farmers, and the exchanges that they needed to trade on.
But it wasn't always an easy fit. Darrell Jobman has known Wasendorf since the 70s and had a small account with Peregrine. He's covered the trading industry as a writer and analyst for decades.
If you take Russ's side of the thing, he comes from Cedar Falls, he's an outsider. He is not part of the Chicago exchange community, and the brokers there are quite protective. I mean, you know, the floor traders and all those kinds of things. And so he came from the outside.
He had offices on LaSalle Street in Chicago, near the Board of Trade. He started a magazine called SFO that featured interviews with celebrities and industry experts. He had a reputation as a good businessman. People remember him as being ambitious and at times aggressive. Former trader John Lothian runs an online media business and has crossed paths with Wasendorf over the years.
He had a tendency to sue brokers when they tried to leave the employ of Peregrine and thus keep their customer business in-house.
Some employees thought he was also intimidating.
Wasendorf was known by his employees and others to be a blunt guy. By his own characterization, you know, he was able to sustain this alleged fraud for so long, in part because of that, by basically coming down hard on anybody that got anywhere close to it. And he liked to, you know, hang out with other important people, some much more famous than himself.
At the annual Futures Industry Association meetings, as a member, Wasendorf would bring in high-profile speakers, including Barbara Bush and Alan Greenspan, as part of what he called the American Heroes Lunch Series.
He always wanted to impress people by either spending lavishly or doing something big.
But in the late 2000s, it became harder to be in the business Peregrine was in. Interest rates around the world dropped significantly, which meant Peregrine couldn't make as much off of the customer money they were holding and collecting interest on. But that didn't stop Wasendorf. In 2009, he decided to move his headquarters from Chicago to a sleek new $18 million office building 5 hours away in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Wasendorf made a big name for himself in town. He gave money to charities and opened up a restaurant on the main strip called My Verona.
He had a private jet. He had this large estate in Cedar Falls. He owned a number of other businesses, restaurants, a printing company, an energy business.
But throughout the first half of 2012, there was some noticeable downscaling. In the spring, there were layoffs, and remaining employees were told they'd have to take a 10% pay cut. Still, if Wasendorf at this point seemed worried, he wasn't showing it in public. Paul Kavanaugh was at Wasendorf Sr.'s home a little over 2 weeks before his suicide attempt.
He was very laid back. We were, sharing a beer on the patio with one of the builders of one of his homes, and cooking pizzas in the outdoor wood-burning pizza stove that he'd just built.
But in mid-June through early July, auditors from the National Futures Association were contacting Wasendorf to conduct their annual audit to make sure his accounts were in good standing. In years past, Wasendorf had been able to simply mail his bank statements into auditors. But this time around, regulators took a different approach.
In the aftermath of MF Global, regulators were pushing conversion to an electronic confirmation system.
But one of the things that they told Wasendorf was that he was going to have to switch to this new electronic system that they were using to verify bank account statements.
We understand that Russell Wasendorf Sr. had pushed back, had delayed.
Wasendorf finally relented, but when he did, just one day before his suicide attempt, what came to light was a stunning discovery. Wasendorf had been doctoring bank statements, leading regulators to believe he had over $200 million in his accounts when he had less than $10 million.
It doesn't seem like it was a terribly sophisticated operation that he was running. Inkjet printer, laser printer, Photoshop. This sort of thing was what he was using to create these fake bank statements.
The core element of this fraud was a post office box in this quaint little post office in Cedar Falls. And this was one that Wasendorf himself had control of. He had given it some name in the registration that looked like it was U.S. Bank, and he had supplied that address to the regulators. So that's where they were seeking confirmation from. Little did they know, apparently, that the confirmation was actually coming from the perpetrator of the fraud.
In the confession that investigators discovered in Wasendorf's car, he laid out the rationale for why he felt compelled to start his fraud some 20 years earlier. He blamed it on what he saw as overzealous regulators.
Russ Wasendorf Sr. writes in this statement that he was forced with the choice: does he go out of business because he can't pony up the extra money to stay in the new requirements that the regulators are putting on him, or does he cheat? Does he take money from his customers use that to fund the business, to meet capital requirements, to pay losses, he says, to pay things like fines and fees from the regulators.
I just don't know how he pulled it off. It's kind of a scheme. I don't know if it was a purposeful scheme or if it was one of those things that started small and you just kind of, you work your way into it. I think his overreach was more than reality could handle.
Peregrine is now closed. All its assets will be liquidated in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Wasendorf remains in federal custody. On August 13th, Wasendorf was indicted on 31 charges of lying to regulators. He's under great scrutiny, but so too are the regulators. Many in the industry argue that by failing to catch a 20-year fraud, the National Futures Association essentially fell asleep on the job. The NFA has said it has already put new verification protocols in place and is proposing even more rigorous electronic ones. But the fallout of the Peregrine scandal on the futures industry could be significant.
This is the last thing that they need after spending the last 6-8 months under the shadow of MF Global. This here seems to be outright fraud if the authorities are to be believed. This is something that gets at the heart of the whole confidence in the futures trading system, the idea that your money is safe with your broker. And right now, people doing business in the futures markets have two big examples of what happens when the firm that you're trusting with your business isn't worthy of that trust.